You know, man, there's something wild that people don't really talk about when it comes to Morgan Freeman. Everyone knows his voice, his roles, the calm wisdom he projects, all that cinematic gravitas. But what most people don't realize is how deeply he actually went into studying different cultures and faiths, not in that surface-level Hollywood way where someone does a documentary and just reads from a script. No, this guy actually dives. He goes into communities, he asks people real questions, he stands in mosques, he listens, he observes. And the thing that really stuck with him, like really left an imprint, was this Islamic idea of unity, this whole concept of believers standing shoulder to shoulder, completely wiping out the idea of status or race or wealth or all the stuff we usually use to divide each other. And the way he'd talk about it wasn't academic or distant. It was like a dude who had just witnessed something that shook his worldview a little bit in a good way. Like he once described standing inside a mosque at prayer time, and you could hear in his voice that he wasn't just watching bodies move in sync. He was watching an idea come to life. Imagine being this guy who spent decades around the most powerful circles, the Hollywood elites, political figures, people soaked in hierarchy and ego, and suddenly you're in a room where none of that matters. You could be a billionaire, you could be a taxi driver, you could be a janitor, you could be a king, and the second you stand in that line, boom, you're equal, shoulder to shoulder. No very important person column, no separate entrance, no reserved spot in the front row, just human beings connecting to something bigger than their own importance. He talked about that like it was one of the purest things he had ever seen. He said it almost felt like stepping into a different world where you finally see what humanity could look like if all the nonsense we cling to was stripped away. And honestly, you get why that would blow his mind. Because we live in a world where everything is about who are you? What do you have? What's your status? How many followers do you have? How much power? How much money? It's like the entire system is designed to separate us, to rank us, to categorize us into little boxes. But then you watch a prayer line form in a mosque, and all those walls just evaporate in an instant. You've got a guy with calluses on his hands from working construction, standing right next to a dude who runs a tech company. You've got someone from Africa next to someone from Asia, next to someone from Europe, next to someone from the Middle East. Different languages, different histories, different skin colors. But once they face the same direction, once they bow together, you can feel that unity as something almost physical. Not metaphorical, actual unity. And that hits different because you can't fake that, you can't choreograph that, that's something real. And Morgan saw that, he felt that. He wasn't just observing people praying, he was observing the collapse of ego. And he'd always talk like, man, why don't we have this everywhere? Why don't we create spaces in the world where everyone is genuinely equal for a moment? Because that's what fascinated him, not just the spiritual aspect, but the psychological one. The idea that when humans have a ritual that forces them into humility, forces them into a shared rhythm, forces them into equality, something changes in the way they see each other. It's like the brain resets its default settings. You stop seeing someone as an outsider. You stop thinking in categories. You stop looking down or up at people. You just see another human being breathing next to you. And that's the part that he said shook him the most. He said in that moment he could see why Islam created such strong communities, why Muslims across continents feel connected to each other even if they've never met. Because it's not just belief, it's practice, it's repetition. It's this embodied equality that gets drilled into you 5 times a day, becomes part of your muscle memory, your emotional memory. Like imagine if every single day of your life, multiple times a day, you literally stood shoulder to shoulder with people of all backgrounds and reminded yourself that your worth isn't tied to your job or your fame or your bank account. That's powerful. That reshapes you. That rewires something deep inside you. And Morgan, being who he is, picked up on that immediately. He saw that this unity wasn't theoretical. It was lived. It was happening right in front of him. And he couldn't help but admire it. Because here's a man who spent his entire life playing characters that explore the human condition, and suddenly he's watching something that feels like the real version of what humanity always pretends to be striving toward. Equality, brotherhood, humility. Except this wasn't some idealistic speech or fictional narrative. It was real people doing real things every single day without cameras, without applause, without any performance, just pure, honest unity. What really blew my mind when I heard Morgan talk about this was how he described the energy of the room. You know how some places have a vibe the second you walk in? Like you enter a gym and you feel that grind energy, Or you walk into a meditation center and suddenly everything slows down? He said a mosque during prayer has this quiet electricity to it, this mix of discipline and softness, like everybody in the room is surrendering their ego at the exact same time. And the crazy part is, none of them are doing it for each other. They're not trying to impress anybody. They're not performing righteousness. They're doing it because the ritual itself demands equality. And he said that's what makes it so genuine. It's not a social act, not a political act, not a cultural act. It's something internal that expresses itself externally in perfect alignment. And Morgan was fascinated with that alignment because he'd spent decades in industries where alignment is almost impossible. Hollywood is chaotic. Politics is chaotic. Media is chaotic. Everybody is pulling in different directions. Everyone is competing for attention, status, relevance. And then here he was, observing a space where millions of people around the world move in sync, speak the same phrase, repeat the same motions, and not because someone forces them to, not because they're trying to show off, but because they believe in something deeper than themselves. And he said that's the part that stuck with him. It wasn't unity built on pressure, it was unity built on sincerity. And the more he talked about it, the more you could feel that he wasn't just admiring some religious practice, he was admiring the philosophy behind it. This core Islamic idea that no human being is superior to another, except by character. Not by wealth, not by race, not by lineage, not by fame. And for a man like Morgan, who comes from a country where race has shaped so much of the social landscape, where inequality is baked into almost every historical chapter, that idea hit him hard. He said there was something profoundly healing in seeing people erase those lines in real time, because the world talks a lot about unity, but most places never actually mean it. It's always unity with conditions. Unity as long as you fit a certain mold. Unity as long as you agree to certain unspoken rules. But here, it was just unity, pure and unfiltered. He described a moment where he saw a wealthy businessman praying right next to an immigrant cab driver, and he said if you filmed it without sound, you wouldn't be able to tell who was who. Their bodies bent the same way, their foreheads touched the ground at the same angle, their hands rested the same way when they stood. And that visual struck him, because in most environments wealth and status scream at you. You can tell who's important. You can tell who's the boss, who's the worker, who's the celebrity, who's the regular guy. But in that line, all those signals were gone. It was like God had thrown a blanket over all the worldly markers humans obsess over and said, not here, not now, not in this moment. And he said that made him question a lot of what we think matters in society, because he realized that most of the divisions we cling to aren't real. They're invented, they're social illusions. And once you strip them away, humans actually look a lot more similar than we're comfortable admitting. And he'd talk about that with this kind of gentle shock, like he was seeing humanity without makeup for the first time. Raw, equal, honest, and he'd say the beauty of the shoulder-to-shoulder idea isn't just that it erases hierarchy, it also erases loneliness. In a world where people feel isolated even in crowded cities, there's something powerful about standing in a line knowing you're par. T of something, knowing you're not alone. Knowing the person next to you is going through the exact same motion, the exact same intention. And you could tell that he didn't just find this interesting, he found it transformative. Because he kept coming back to it, over and over. Like he had seen countless cultures, countless traditions, countless spiritual practices, but this one, this Islamic unity thing, left a dent in him. He said there was nothing symbolic or poetic about it. It was literal, actual equality happening right in front of him, and in a world obsessed with dividing itself into categories, he thought that was revolutionary, not modern or progressive or futuristic. Revolutionary in the simplest, most ancient way, the kind of thing humans have been searching for centuries but never fully achieved outside of small pockets. What Morgan kept emphasizing, man, was how real it all felt. He wasn't talking about unity like some motivational speaker throwing around buzzwords. He was talking about something he saw, something he felt settle into his chest. And he'd say it with this tone like, how the hell does the rest of the world not notice this? Because when you walk into most environments, you sense the hierarchy instantly. You walk into a restaurant and people size each other up based on what they're wearing. You walk into an office and the guy with the corner desk carries a different aura than the intern running around with coffee, even in families, even in friend groups, there's always this invisible ranking system that everyone pretends not to see, but subconsciously adjusts to. And then there's this one place, this one ritual, where all of that just dissolves, and he couldn't get over how powerful that was. He said it made him rethink how humans behave when they're stripped of competition. Like imagine a space where nobody is looking at you, nobody is judging. Nobody is trying to outdo you. You're just there, present, equal. And he said that when people stand shoulder to shoulder like that, you can feel the walls drop. Because humans were never meant to be isolated egos floating around trying to outperform each other. We were wired for tribe, for community, for connection. But somewhere along the line, modern society kind of ripped that away and replaced it with this hyper-individualistic mindset where your worth is measured by how many people know your name or how expensive your lifestyle looks. And he said watching Muslims pray was like watching a reset button being pressed on the human psyche. And the part that really got him was how intentional it all was. This wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't an accidental byproduct. It was designed into the religion. The prayer lines weren't just practical, they were symbolic, psychological, spiritual, all at once. He said it was like Islam understood the human ego long before modern psychology did. Because think about it, what better way to humble a person than to literally put them in the same line as someone they might unconsciously feel superior to? And what better way to remind someone of their worth than placing them next to someone they might feel inferior to? It flattens everything. And he said that flattening effect feels like truth, not ideological truth, not philosophical truth, human truth. He even mentioned how silence in that space feels different, not like the awkward silence of a board meeting or the heavy silence of a funeral. It's this gentle, unified silence, a silence where 1,000 thoughts get replaced by one intention. And he said that's the moment he understood why so many people find comfort in Islamic practice, because life throws so much noise at you, fear, stress, insecurity, ambition, distraction, and here's this ritual that cuts through it and says, breathe, stand, align, you're not alone. And he said that when the whole room bows together, it's like the world exhales for a second. But the thing that he found the most beautiful, the thing he said he wished every human could experience at least once, was how nobody holds back. Nobody tries to stand taller, nobody peeks around to see who's watching, nobody adjusts their posture to look more impressive. That moment where the forehead touches the ground, he said that's the most democratic act he's ever witnessed. Because you can't be arrogant with your head in the dirt. You can't feel superior when you're in the exact same vulnerable position as the person next to you. That act equalizes the soul in a way that nothing else does. And he was so fascinated by how natural it seemed for people to do it. Because we're living in this era where people talk about humility like it's some complicated self-help skill you have to train for. But here are people who practice it multiple times a day. Not conceptually, physically. And he said that's why it works. Because humans learn through movement, through repetition. You do something often enough and it shapes your inner world. So if you practice equality 5 times a day, eventually equality becomes part of who you are. He said that's what most people miss about Islam. They think it's just rules, rituals, restrictions. But when he observed it, he didn't see restriction, he saw structure. He saw something that holds the human ego together so it doesn't run wild. Something that builds unity instead of competition. Something that builds brotherhood instead of isolation. And that's why he admired it. Not from a religious endorsement perspective, not from a political angle, but from a deeply human one. The kind of admiration you feel when you see a system functioning the way humanity was meant to function. What Morgan kept circling back to, man, was this idea that the world has been searching for equality in all the wrong places. We look to governments, we look to speeches, we look to protests, we look to celebrities posting statements online, but none of that actually changes how people see each other in their day-to-day lives. It doesn't shift the ego. It doesn't break the psychological habits that keep us comparing, competing, and separating ourselves. And he said that when he watched Muslims pray, he saw equality not as a slogan but as a practice, something lived, something physical, something that didn't require debate or convincing, just alignment. He talked about how rare it is to see a moment where humans voluntarily let go of status. Because you look around today and everyone is holding on to their identity like it's a trophy. People define themselves by their labels, political, racial, economic, digital, and everyone is trying to be something, trying to stand out, trying to build a brand. But here's a moment where none of that matters. When you're shoulder to shoulder, you don't know who's a doctor, who's unemployed, who's famous, who's struggling to pay rent. And Morgan said that anonymity, true anonymity, creates this sense of purity, a moment where you're not performing for the world, you're just existing as a human being. And he kept mentioning the psychology of it, because that's the part that fascinated him the most. He said modern society has created this epidemic of loneliness. People are surrounded by millions, yet still feel like they don't belong anywhere. And then suddenly he sees a place where belonging is built into the architecture. You walk into a mosque, and the space isn't designed for one person to dominate. There's no throne, there's no elevated pedestal, there's no better seat. It's a flat floor, a communal direction, a shared rhythm. And he said the simplicity of that design was genius. Like ancient human engineering engineered for the soul. He talked about how people underestimate the power of synchronized movement, because synchronized movement bonds people. That's why armies march, that's why sports teams chant, that's why concerts create shared emotional states. Humans feel connected when they move together, but Islam does it with humility, not through hype, not through aggression, not through noise, but through calm, intentional submission. And he said that's what makes it work. It unites without inflaming the ego. He mentioned this moment that stuck with him, watching a man walk into the mosque stressed out, shoulders tight, face tense, and slowly, as the prayer began, you could see this shift in his posture. His breathing slowed, his shoulders dropped, his face softened, and Morgan said he realized he wasn't just watching worship. He was watching healing, like the environment itself was peeling the weight off the guy's chest. And he said that moment made him understand why Muslims feel attached to their community. Because they don't just gather, they recalibrate each other. Another thing he pointed out was how the unity wasn't forced. Nobody was standing in the corner checking if you were rich enough or educated enough to belong. Nobody was questioning who you were. Nobody cared if you walked in wearing expensive clothes or something simple. You show up, you stand in line, and just like that, you're part of something. And he said that kind of acceptance is almost extinct in modern society. Everywhere else, people have to qualify to belong. They have to earn approval. They have to impress. But in that prayer line, belonging is automatic, it's unconditional. And he said that shook him because of how profoundly human it felt. He said it reminded him of tribes, the ancient way humans gathered around fire, around common purpose. But instead of fire, it was prayer direction. Instead of ritual war dances, it was a ritual of humility. Instead of chanting for victory, it was whispering for guidance. And he said that kind of communal energy is something we're starving for without even realizing it. People chase it in nightclubs, in fandoms, in political rallies, in online groups, but none of that gives the grounded, calm, centered unity he saw in that room. And the wild part is, he said you don't have to be Muslim to feel the weight of it. Just being present in that environment hits you in a way you don't expect. He said you walk in thinking you're an observer, but something about that unity pulls you in, even if you don't participate. It's like watching a river. You don't have to swim in it to feel how strong the current is. And he said Islam understood something ancient. That unity isn't taught, it's practiced, it's embodied, it's repeated until it becomes the default state of the heart. What Morgan kept pointing out, man, was how much this whole shoulder thing exposes the illusion of separation we walk around with every day. He said humans trick themselves into thinking they're different from each other because of jobs, accent, skin color, money, culture. But when people stand in that line, none of that feels real anymore. And he said that's the part that stayed in his mind long after he left the mosque. The idea that maybe the world isn't actually as divided as we think it is. Maybe the divisions are just loud. Maybe the ego makes the noise, not the truth. Because the truth he saw in that room was quiet, calm, but stronger than anything. He talked about how incredible it is that 5 times a day, around the planet, millions of people replicate that exact same moment. Same posture, same intention, same line formation. And he said that level of unity is unheard of. Not even Nat. Ions can pull that off. Not corporations, not movements, not social media trends, nothing aligns people that consistently. And he said he couldn't get over how unique that is. Imagine the sun setting in one country and people begin to pray, and while they are praying, someone across the ocean is waking up and doing the same thing. And then someone else in another time zone does it. And it keeps happening, like this global heartbeat. Like the planet has a pulse and Muslims are moving in rhythm with it. And he said that kind of alignment gives you a sense of scale, like you suddenly understand how big humanity is, but also how connected it is. He said the most surprising thing was how natural the companionship looked. He said he didn't see strangers. He saw brothers, not biologically, not socially, but in the deeper sense, the way soldiers feel bonded during battle or athletes feel bonded after a hard season. Except this bond didn't come from trauma or competition. It came from shared humility. And he said that level of brotherhood is something the world desperately tries to create in all the wrong ways. People chase belonging through tribes built on anger, or identity politics, or entertainment obsessions, or online cliques. But none of that gives the slow, steady, grounded feeling he saw on the faces of the men standing next to each other with absolute calmness. He talked about how crazy it is that you can walk into a mosque anywhere in the world, New York, Karachi, Lagos, Paris, Dubai, and the experience is the same. The language might shift a bit, the architecture might change, but the unity doesn't. He said it was like stepping into a portal. You could teleport someone from one country to another, and the moment they step into the prayer line, they know exactly what to do. No hesitation, no decoding, no need for translation. And he said that shows you something about structure that most modern systems miss: universality. The idea that a ritual should be so simple and so deep that it survives every culture, every time period, every level of education. And he said Islam nailed that in a way almost nothing else has. He mentioned how that shoulder-to-shoulder moment is the ultimate equalizer. Because while the world is fighting over superiority, Islam literally built a ritual around leveling everything. He said he saw a tall, muscular guy stand next to a skinny old man, and when prayer started, all the physical differences stopped mattering. One wasn't more dominant, one wasn't more fragile. They were the same, equal, breathing, bowing, submitting to something above them both. And he said that moment made him think about how much of modern society is structured around hierarchy, business, politics, entertainment, even social interactions. But here was a ritual that collapses hierarchy in seconds. You enter the line and instantly you're just a human soul among other human souls. He also pointed out something a lot of people miss: the concept of straight rows. He said watching people adjust their feet to make the line perfectly even was symbolic in a way he didn't expect. It wasn't military precision, it wasn't controlling, it was mutual respect, like everybody silently agreeing, we're in this together. He said the straight line wasn't about discipline, it was about unity. You align your body with others because you're aligning your heart with others. There's something incredibly intimate about that, something trust-based, something that modern society rarely gives people the chance to feel. And he talked about how emotional it was watching people stand so close that their shoulders touched. He said physical proximity in today's world is usually awkward, uncomfortable. People avoid sitting too close on buses or trains. Everyone needs personal space, a little bubble to feel safe. But in that moment, the bubble doesn't exist, you willingly break it. And he said that's a level of trust that can only come from surrendering the ego. Because the ego hates closeness, it hates vulnerability, but unity demands it. He kept saying it was one of the few times he saw humans act like a single organism, a single body, and he said it made him understand why Muslims, even if they're from different continents, feel this instant connection when they meet. Because they've been trained, literally trained, to see each other as equals. And he said the training is worth more than any speech, any law, any policy. It's the kind of training that rewires the spirit. What Morgan kept saying, man, was that the thing people misunderstand the most is how intentional this unity is. It's not random, it's not coincidental, it's engineered into the faith with precision. And he said that blew his mind because it meant someone, somewhere, understood human psychology so deeply that they built a system capable of dissolving ego on a daily basis. He said when you look at the world today, everybody anxious, everybody comparing themselves, everybody fighting invisible battles, you realize how badly we've messed up the architecture of community. Everything is competitive, everything is curated, everything is based on who looks more successful. But Islam flips that whole structure on its head and says, let's build equality from the ground up. He said the moment that really hit him was watching a teenager stand next to an old man, both doing the same motions with the same seriousness, the same focus. In any other setting, age becomes hierarchy. The older guy gets more respect automatically. The younger guy is expected to follow, but here, respect flows differently. It flows through humility, not age. It flows through sincerity, not authority. And Morgan said that kind of environment has a healing effect, especially on younger people, because for once, they're not being measured, they're not being ranked, they're not being compared, they're just being human. And he said that's something the modern world desperately lacks, spaces where people can exist without performing identity. He talked about how he noticed people enter the mosque with all their differences. Different accents, different clothes, different moods, but once the line forms, all those differences flatten. Not disappear, not erased, just irrelevant. He said it reminded him of watching astronauts talk about seeing Earth from space, how all the borders vanish, how suddenly the world looks like one organism, one home. He said the shoulder-to-shoulder prayer line is like a ground-level version of that cosmic perspective. It's humanity but zoomed out of the nonsense. And what struck him the most was how effortless it all seemed. People weren't trying to be united, they just were, because the ritual pulls them into the same rhythm. And he said that rhythm does something to the brain. It cancels out noise, it cancels out your ego's need to stand out, it cancels out your fear of being judged, because the guy next to you is doing the exact same thing, and the guy next to him, and the guy next to him. It's like a wave of equality that moves across the room in perfect silence. He said he couldn't find anything like that anywhere else. Not in churches OT in meditation retreats, not in concerts, not in political gatherings. Because everything else is divided by roles. Speaker and listener, performer and audience, leader and follower. But in this moment, nobody leads except the imam, and even he stands in the same line. Even he isn't elevated above anyone physically. And Morgan said that visual alone was enough to show him that Islam wasn't built around human authority. It was built around collective submission. And that's why it works. Because humans don't unite around other humans, they unite around purpose. He talked about how the moment everyone bows together is almost cinematic, like you're watching a single breath move through 1,000 bodies. And he said he realized that unity isn't created through words, it's created through synchronized humility. Because when you bow, you're acknowledging something bigger than yourself. And when you see everyone else bow with you, you realize you're part of something larger. Bigger than nationality, bigger than culture, bigger than identity. He said that's what fascinated him the most. How Islam doesn't try to erase differences, it just deprioritizes them. Race still exists, age still exists, wealth still exists. But none of it affects the prayer line. And he said that's the genius. The equality isn't conceptual, it's physical, it's repeated, it's lived. And he said that's why Muslims feel so connected to each other globally. Because this unity isn't something they talk about, it's something they've practiced literally thousands of times. It becomes muscle memory, emotional memory, spiritual memory. You stand next to people you don't know, and yet for that moment you're family. Not because you said anything, not because you bonded over hobbies or politics, but because you humbled yourself with them. And Morgan said that kind of unity leaves a mark on the heart. Morgan kept talking about how seeing this unity firsthand gave him a new perspective on humanity itself. He said, man, this is what humans were made for. Not competition, not comparison, not clout chasing. This. And he'd get this quiet intensity in his voice like he was still processing it. He said watching people line up shoulder to shoulder, listening to the collective hum of prayer, it's like watching humanity find its balance for the first time in centuries. And that balance isn't just spiritual, it's psychological, it's emotional. You can feel it in the room, you can feel it in yourself, even if you're just observing. It's contagious, in a way that social media hype or inspirational speeches can never be. He talked about the paradox of it too, how something so simple, just standing in a straight line, facing the same direction, repeating words, bowing, prostrating, can create this immense sense of equality and belonging. He said it made him question how much of what we consider complex in society is actually just noise. We complicate relationships, hierarchies, politics, even morality, but here, humans are united by the simplicity of shared practice. And that simplicity, Morgan said, is genius. Because it works on every level, mind, body, soul. You can't fake it, you can't perform it, it's either real or it isn't. And he said that's why it stays with people. It changes them. He mentioned how the shoulder-to-shoulder alignment is not just about equality, it's about visibility. Everyone sees everyone else in the same way. No one is hidden, no one is elevated, no one is diminished. And he said that gives a person a sense of accountability, not to other humans, but to the idea of equality itself. You're literally confronted with the humanity of the person next to you, and you can't ignore it. And he said that kind of confrontation is rare in life, because most social structures let us avoid it. We isolate ourselves with privilege, wealth, fame, or ideology. But here, you can't. You are physically, emotionally, and spiritually shoulder to shoulder with your neighbor, and there's nowhere to hide. Morgan said he was fascinated by the repetition too, because 5 times a day this happens, and he realized repetition builds rhythm, and rhythm builds habit, and habit builds character. And if you do something enough, it becomes part of your identity. He said it's like training for a marathon of the soul. Every prayer is a step. Every bow, every prostration, every aligned line reinforces the idea that we are equals. And that, he said, is something the modern world doesn't teach. Society teaches you to compete, to rank, to rise above. But here, the training is to release all of that, to reset, to remember you're human, just like the person next to you. He kept returning to the emotional impact. He said he watched men and women come into the mosque, weighed down with life, tension, fear, doubts, frustrations, and by the time they left, they carried a different energy, calmer, grounded, connected. And he said that's the effect of lived unity, not words, not slogans, not speeches, but the act of being aligned with other humans, of performing the same ritual, of respecting the same rhythm. And he said that effect isn't temporary, it sticks. Because when your body remembers equality, your mind starts to follow, your emotions recalibrate, your spirit recognizes the truth of connection. He talked about how this makes Muslims feel like part of a global family even if they've never met each other, because you've been practicing the same acts as someone halfway across the world for decades. And Morgan said that's a kind of social engineering that's centuries ahead of anything else. You don't need technology, you don't need government, you don't need fancy institutions. You need practice. Intentional, repeated, embodied practice that reminds people every day, you are not above, you are not below, you are equal. And when he said that, you could hear in his voice the awe he felt, like he had stumbled onto a secret of humanity that the rest of the world hasn't. Morgan kept talking about how the visual of the prayer line is so powerful. He said it's almost like watching a living diagram of equality, like the human body rearranged itself into the perfect blueprint for fairness. And what hit him was that it wasn't static. It's dynamic. People move, bow, kneel, stand, and the line shifts, but the integrity remains. Nobody gets left out, nobody steps ahead, nobody falls behind. He said that movement itself becomes a metaphor for life. We bend together, we rise together, we progress together. And that, he said, is something humans rarely experience outside of those rare moments of true trust or intimacy. The rest of the world is chaos by comparison, ego running wild, everyone for themselves. He kept circling back to how inclusive it all is. Morgan said he saw people from all social classes, from all ethnic backgrounds, from all ages, from every imaginable walk of life, and nobody judged anyone else. Nobody whispered, nobody gawked, nobody scoffed. And he said that's a radical idea in today's world, because everywhere else people categorize, segregate, rank, compare. And yet here, this system makes you forget all of that. It's like equality is physically written into the way humans interact. It's not a thought experiment, not a theory. It's real, tangible, embodied. And he said that's why it's so moving, because humans are desperate for a place where the masks come off, where hierarchy evaporates, where you don't have to pretend. He mentioned watching someone who clearly had a lot of wealth, maybe a businessman or an entrepreneur, stand next to someone clearly struggling, someone barely making ends meet, and both of them were absorbed in the same rhythm, completely equal. Morgan said that visual alone was more profound than any speech about equality he had ever heard, because seeing it played out in real time, with no editorial filter, no cameras, no hype, was undeniable proof that humans could relate to each other without ego. And he said he wanted the world to understand that, because it's so rare to witness. He also spoke about the subtle psychological trick the practice creates. By forcing people to physically align, to move together, to synchronize breaths and gestures, you get a literal sense of connection that goes beyond words. He said it's almost like the body rewires the mind. You can't bow together without sensing the presence of your neighbors, and your nervous system picks up on that equality. He said it's something science could probably explain, but you don't need science to feel it, you just feel it, it sinks in. And he said that's why even non-Muslims who observe it often leave the room affected. Morgan also marveled at how persistent the practice is. 5 times a day, every day throughout lifetimes. People don't take breaks, they don't skip decades. And he said that repetition builds something you can't buy, deep internalized respect for other humans. Not respect because someone is smarter or richer or older, but respect because equality is the default. And he said that's revolutionary because most social structures have to legislate, campaign, negotiate, or enforce equality. But here, it's trained into the bones. He even noted the humility embedded in physical posture, the bow, the prostration, the act of lowering yourself, of bringing your forehead to the floor. He said it physically reminds you that ego is small, that your status is irrelevant in that moment, and when you do that shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of others, it becomes communal humility. And he said watching that made him reflect on how few rituals in life do this. Most human activities reinforce pride, reinforce hierarchy, reinforce separation. This one dismantles it. Slowly, steadily, perfectly. Morgan kept saying that what made this whole thing so incredible wasn't just the unity, it was the consistency. Because it's one thing to gather people once in a while and call it equality, but it's another to practice it every day, multiple times a day for years, for decades. He said that kind of repetition embeds values deeper than any speech or lesson ever could. He was fascinated by how humans could literally train themselves to internalize equality. Because when you do something often enough, it moves from concept to instinct. And that, he said, is the real genius of Islam. It's not just teaching ethics. It's creating a lived, repeated system where ethics become embodied. You don't have to think about it anymore. Your body knows it, your mind knows it, your heart knows it. He also reflected on the social implications. Morgan said that if more humans experienced this kind of equality in practice, the world would feel completely different. Wars wouldn't happen the way they do, discrimination would lose its power, people would approach one another with curiosity instead of judgment. And he said watching Muslims practice this in such a straightforward, consistent way made him wonder why humanity had abandoned rituals like this elsewhere. Because the power of aligning humanity, even briefly, shoulder to shoulder, is enormous. And he said most people completely underestimate it. They think unity is a theory, a slogan, a political speech. But here, it's tangible, actionable, repeated. You see it, you feel it, you experience it. He described watching young children joining the adults in the line, copying the movements perfectly, absorbing the practice before they even fully understand it. He said that was another thing that blew him away. Children naturally absorb the lessons of equality and humility because it's not being explained to them. It's being practiced in front of them. They watch, they mimic, they internalize, and he said that's something modern education rarely achieves. Most schools try to teach respect and cooperation through rules and punishments. Islam, in contrast, teaches it through lived example, repeated daily, embedded in the body and mind of every participant from childhood onward. And he said that observation alone made him rethink how humans teach values. Morgan also talked about the emotional resonance. He said that even without understanding all the words being said, even without being a participant, there's a palpable sense of belonging, of safety, of rhythm. It's impossible not to feel something when 100 people move in unison, breathing, bowing, kneeling, rising together. And he said that the physicality of it, the contact, the alignment, the mirrored movements creates empathy in a way abstract ideas can't. It's something your body feels before your mind even registers it. And he said that's the ultimate proof of humanity's need for shared ritual, for shared practice, for shared grounding. He kept returning to the same point over and over, that this unity isn't fragile, it's not temporary, it's not just a feel-good moment, it's durable because it's embedded into daily life. It doesn't rely on perfect conditions, celebrity endorsement, or political support. It relies on practice, repetition, intention. And he said that's what sets it apart from anything else he's ever witnessed in human history. Because most attempts at equality collapse under stress, distraction, or inconsistency. But here, the system itself resists collapse. It's built to endure, and Morgan said he found that profoundly moving, like witnessing an ancient secret of humanity that the rest of the world had forgotten. And Morgan kept circling back to the ripple effect of all this. He said, "Man, it's not just about the people in the line, it's about the energy that radiates out from them. You stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers in unity, and something happens, you carry it with you afterward." He said he noticed people leaving the mosque calmer, more grounded, more patient. Interactions afterward shift without them even realizing it. The humility, the equality, the shared rhythm doesn't stop when you walk out the door. It lingers. It affects the way you treat strangers, your family, your colleagues, your neighbors. And he said that's the genius. Small actions repeated daily, multiplied across millions of humans, creates a social fabric that's fundamentally stronger than any law or policy or speech could achieve. He talked about how this practice creates a sense of accountability too. Not accountability in the judgmental sense, but a recognition that your behavior matters, that your presence contributes to the collective. When you're standing shoulder to shoulder, every small movement matters. You are literally part of a chain of human connection. And he said that teaches responsibly. Thank you in a subtle but profound way. It teaches respect without lectures. It teaches humility without sermons. It teaches equality without theory. It just is. And when he said that, you could tell he was struck by the simplicity of it, by the elegance, by the fact that humans could build a system that actually transforms society from the inside out. Morgan also mentioned how this shoulder-to-shoulder unity reflects something deeper about Islam itself. It's not just about ritual, it's about philosophy, ethics, and vision. That people are created equal, that differences shouldn't divide, that the human spirit thrives in harmony with others. And he said he realized that's why the faith has endured for so long, and why it resonates with millions around the world, because it doesn't just preach equality, it trains humans to live it, to embody it, to practice it, until it becomes instinctive, automatic, natural. And he said that's what makes it powerful, enduring, and universal. He reflected on the fact that in a world obsessed with labels, status, and ego, this practice offers a radical alternative. You could argue politics, media, or education could change things, but none of it works as well as consistent, repeated, lived experience. He said he understood why communities who practice this daily feel connected to each other across continents, across cultures, across generations. Because they're literally practicing the same movements, the same rituals, the same moments of humility and equality. And that practice creates a global resonance, a shared understanding that doesn't rely on language, nationality, or politics. It's universal. It's human. Morgan said that when he watched all this, it changed his perspective on leadership, on society, on human potential. He said we spend so much time trying to teach equality, trying to legislate fairness, trying to create programs and institutions, but here was a system that just worked on the human spirit naturally, rhythmically, repeatedly. And he said that gave him hope, because it shows that humans aren't broken. We're capable of incredible empathy and connection if the system encourages it instead of obstructing it. He kept emphasizing the simplicity of it, man, that all you need is practice, alignment, humility, and repetition. That's the whole secret. And he said that when millions of humans live like that, shoulder to shoulder, every day, the effect is profound. Not loud, not flashy, not political, but real, deep, transformative. And he said that if the world paid attention to this model, if we understood the physical, emotional, spiritual mechanics behind it, we'd probably rethink everything about how we build society, how we educate kids, how we connect with each other. And in the end, Morgan's admiration wasn't about religion per se, it wasn't about ideology, it was about humanity, about witnessing a system that honors the inherent dignity of every single human being every day over and over without fail. And he said that's the part that stayed with him the most, the part that really shocked him, humbled him, and gave him a new lens to see the world through, a lens where equality isn't a dream or an abstract concept. It's lived, practiced, felt, and carried forward by millions every single day, in perfect rhythm, shoulder to shoulder,